of Torah for Gentiles. The whole point of the letter was to explain this to them, repeat for them what he had preached to them, and why his version is correct. And they were initially correct when they became Christians according to his gospel and were baptized, rather than those Judaizers who came later into the region of Galatia and began to undermine Paul's teaching by telling these new converts that what Paul had taught them was not correct. I want you to remember, way beyond Paul's letters, this remains an important issue for the first at least 2.5 centuries of the church. It would take a long time for this to settle. We have the experience of 2,000 years of Christianity without Torah. But at the time of Paul, it was not at all clear where the right path lay, because the original followers of Jesus were split on this question. Peter and James, certainly James, seemed to believe that you had to go in the direction of Judaism and Jewish observance. Peter at first, and then certainly Paul, will come in with a very different view. And this will be the draft of Paul's letter, really, for the big letter that we're going to do tonight, Romans. So I just want to summarize Galatians with these couple of verses from Galatians chapter 5. Look here, I, Paul, say to you that if you undergo circumcision, Christ will be of no help to you. I testify once more to everyone who gets himself circumcised that he is obligated to observe the whole of the law. Speaking to those of you who think you are being rectified by the law, I say, you have nothing more to do with Christ. You have fallen out of the realm of grace. With us, things are entirely different. Having the Spirit in our hearts and having the confidence that comes from faith, we eagerly await the hope of rectification or justification. For in Christ Jesus, neither circumcision nor uncircumcision accomplishes anything at all. The real power is faith, actively working through love. So Paul will continue in Romans to posit it is faith in the gospel of Jesus Christ and the power of his death and resurrection that offers salvation. It not only is not Torah, it cannot be Torah. The Torah was needed at one time and is now not only not needed, it is a hindrance to faith. So before I get into Romans, this will spark a problem not only with Jewish people who are interested in converting to Christianity, but it will cause a problem for Gentiles who will begin to ask questions. We see this in Paul's letters, but also in Acts of the Apostles and in Luke's Gospel. There remain hints of this being a problem. The Gentiles themselves who have converted to Christianity will begin to hear more and more about the Jewishness of Jesus and the Jewishness of the Messiah and all of that kind of stuff. And they'll begin to ask the question, well, if God first offered the covenant and the promise to the Jews, Noah, Abraham, and then ultimately, of course, from Sinai, the Torah, and God has now abandoned the Jews, why should we have faith in this new weird God of yours that he won't do the same thing to us? Paul will touch on this lightly in Galatians. He will address it more directly in Romans. So apparently, Romans being written later, this sounds like it might become a growing problem with the Gentiles. How do we explain to Gentiles the relationship of this religion and of Jesus and us to Judaism? And in Romans, you will have a chance to more broadly explain what he's talking about.
How did abandon the Jews? You just said that. What does that mean?
The fear is on the part of Gentiles that they're understanding the gospel to be saying God has abandoned his promise to the Jews and has now made it to the followers of Jesus. And the Gentiles are wondering, how is it that God will not be faithful to the Jews? Why should we believe that he would be faithful to us? We'll see in Romans, Paul's answer to that is God is and has been faithful. The Jews have not been faithful. But his promise is still open and available to them. He will kind of twist it on its head in a kind of a typical Pauline way. Actually, what he will say is, I need to get all the Gentiles into the church that I can so that the Jews will now realize, oh, we missed our chance. The Gentiles are beating us. And out of embarrassment, and this is what he says, and out of embarrassment, they will finally come and embrace Christ. So all you Gentiles, you're helping us to convert the Jews because they had their chance and missed it, but they don't realize it. If we get a bunch of Gentiles into the church, then the Jews will realize it, and we can kind of shame them into seeing the rightness of the way of the gospel. It doesn't work, obviously. Yes?
So if there was, lack of a better word, a Jewish Christian, like somebody who had been
that's the perfect term. Really, I know it sounds bizarre, but it is the perfect term. The Jewish
so
Christian.
then could they become, I mean, in other words, like would it be okay in Paul's mind to convert from this Jewish Christian to a Gentile type Christian, even though they're Jewish?
Oh gosh, that's.
I mean, like, or are they kind of? I hate to say this word, but we're like, once you have all that Jewishness.
How do you abandon it? Ought you abandon
Yeah, I mean, would they be accepted?
See, this is a problem. My own personal problem in studying Paul is exactly that issue, because Paul says in Galatians, once you have submitted to circumcision, you are obliged to the 613 requirements of Torah.
Uh-huh.
But he is a circumcised Jew and has completely abandoned Torah. And he says so in Galatians.
So why would he say that?
I don't know. He does the same thing to Barnabas and threatens with Titus. You've given in to them, now you're stuck. You signed the contract, and you're due to repay. Yes?
I don't see that rub so much, because at least in my mind, when I hear that, Paul was raised a Jew prior to Christ's saving activity. And so it's after that fact that these individuals are being asked to do that, with that knowledge of the saving activity of Christ.
That is part of his answer. Another part that he will appeal to without saying so directly is, all of us did it on the 8th day after our birth. Those who do it as adults now know better. We had no say in our circumcision as good Orthodox Jews. It had to be done on the 8th day after birth. He will appeal to that, but it's in a very kind of nonchalant way. I wish he would have just said, oops, I made a mistake. I didn't. Because it's still, I at least would like to have it explained better than I've heard it explained to me, present company excluded. But yeah, it's a problem I have as well. I don't quite understand how Paul truly confronts this. But he does say to Peter, and when he did his letter to the Galatians, you're flip-flopping, and that's what I'm doing, but you're telling the Jewish Christians they can't do that. So, it's ambivalent in my mind. All right, so Romans. Paul, let me just say a little bit about Romans. The Romans, not the letter. In Judaism in Rome. There is a sizable Jewish population in Rome, we believe, already in the late 200s BC. So by 250 BC, we know that there are Jews who have emigrated from further east, both Israel and elsewhere in the east, westward to Rome. We know that the Romans have a legal, now this is the Republican period, this isn't yet the empire, so this is still the Republic, run by the Senate. Roman law requires the participation of all Romans in the civic religion of the pantheon of the Greco-Roman gods. It is a civic requirement, not just the idea of civics and religion are very much mixed in this world. And any Roman who does not participate in the civic cult can be accused of tyranny and of being a traitor. Why? Because Rome depends on the pleasant attitude of the gods for her success. And if you don't do what keeps the gods happy, then you're threatening the security of the city of Rome. However, the Romans have a great respect for anything that is very old, and they have a certain exotic notion about things from the East. So they love Egyptian stuff. They have a great respect. Their understanding from their study of history is that the Egyptians were the first true civilization. The Greeks learned the secrets of the Egyptians, and the Romans learned the secrets of the Greeks. Anything that's older than their own, what they know to be their own civilization, they have a great respect for. they do know that Judaism is older than their own religion. There was somehow a sense of Roman Gentiles knowing that their city-state begins around 600, 700 BC. They know that by that time Judaism already is a well-established religion. I don't know how they know that, but they are convinced of it. And that fact means that they will allow Judaism in and among Romans. So they will not arrest a Jew in the city of Rome for not offering incense to the gods. But there is still an ambiguity about their relationship. So legally, they are an accepted religion. But in fact, they really don't like them very much. It's not called anti-Semitism yet. At this point, it's called Judeophobia. There is a certain ignorance and fear of Jews and Judaism. And I'd like to make sure you understand how and why that would be. So if you're Mr. and Mrs. Macaronius and you're living next door to the Goldbergs, and you want to be friendly to your neighbors, and you get 2 tickets for some big wrestling match, you come over to your neighbors, the Goldbergs, and say, I've got 2 front row tickets for this boxing match, and they say no. You think, well, okay, probably a conflict on their calendar. But the real reason they don't is because wrestling matches are always done, like all athletic competitions, done in the nude. Jews do not find nudity as an affront. But also it begins with prayers and perhaps even sacrifices to the god Heracles, as all sporting events were dedicated to Heracles. So you don't want anything to do with that. Okay. Next week, you're having a barbecue. You're going to have some nice pork chops and ribs, and you invite your neighbors, and they can smell the pork on the grill. No, thank you. We won't be able to join you. Okay. Oh, next week is the big celebration of Apollo at his temple down on the Via Sacra. There are going to be some great lamb chops available after that sacrifice. Why don't you join us? We've got ringside seats for it. No, they won't do that either. They won't go to plays, because plays begin with prayers and sacrifices. Depending on how orthodox and observant they are, they won't even enter your house. They certainly cannot eat at a table with you, and you cannot eat at a table with them. Even if you're not eating, even if you're eating kosher food, they still can't dine with you because you are unclean simply by the fact that you are not Jews. Now, it depends. You're on a spectrum of observance. The really observant would object to all this. Not all Jews are all that observant. Something like Judaism today, there's a whole wild degree of observances. But you, as a Gentile neighbor, begin to get an unease about these people. Well, and by the way, what in the hell are they doing over there every Saturday? The curtains are drawn, they never come out. It's like they just disappear. What are they doing over there? Because, of course, you're observing the Sabbath. So you're not cutting the grass, you're not working in the yard, you're quietly reading and studying Torah. You can see how this kind of unease about Jews, while legally they enjoy a status of a legal religion, unofficially, they're not well liked. So what we find is some Roman law cases where, for example, a neighbor brings a Jewish family to court. Let's say they're suing you for an extra 5 feet of property along your property line, and the court hears, the complaint of the neighbor, and the list of complaints will include the property question, but they will throw in another charge. Well, besides the fact that it's really my driveway, besides the fact that they started pushing their problem over on our side of the property, they are also, and this is the official charge, they are haters of humanity. And you can see there's a lot of evidence for that. You never accept any of our invitations. We've asked you 20 times to go to dinner with us. You won't go. We've given you tickets to symphonies, to plays. You won't come. You think you're better than us, whatever. So you can see how this would become a problem. And it does become a problem. The legality of the religion is deeply embedded in the law code of Rome, such that when, both in the Republican, but certainly later in the imperial period, when the emperor or the Senate wishes to keep the mob happy by giving them more bread and more circuses, which was really a part of not just social welfare, it was a political way of keeping the mob from storming, the powers that be, the Jews could not accept the bread. They had government bakeries baking loaves of bread and doling them out to the poor on these particular days, and the Jews could not accept the bread because it wasn't prepared according to kosher rules. So the city of Rome had special arrangements for the Jewish civic leaders of the city that they would pay them the money to go to your own bakers and bake your own bread for the dole of bread for the poor. A little footnote. When the emperor does something like that, or when the Senate would do something like that and declare next Tuesday is going to be a holiday, and the emperor is going to give everybody free food, that is known by a very specific word, evangelion, good news, gospel. The word gospel is the use of a similar word, the same word in fact, used by the imperial cult in the later empire for announcing something to the people that they would like, but it's for the sake of the emperor. So it's the emperor's birthday, because today is the emperor's birthday, you will get extra bread. Because the emperor just had a son, you'll get free tickets to the Colosseum for the next week. That's an evangelion, that's an evangelization, it's a good news, it's a gospel. So it's interesting that the early Christians understand what they're doing to be something like this. It's about the emperor, but it's good for us. It might be about God or about Jesus, but we benefit from it. Just a little footnote. Okay. So we know that there are Jews in Rome. We know that there are Jews trading across the Mediterranean from Rome to other sites. There are Jews in Israel trading dried fish, especially Magdala, Mary of Magdalene. The Magdala is the name of the town. That town was known in the ancient world as having a tower. The word Magdal in Hebrew is tower, where fish were dried and salted. So they would lay them on racks, open air on it looks like it's a corn silo that's got air vents in it, with racks and racks and racks where these dead fish are lying, and they're salted and the air circulates and kind of desiccates them before they can spoil or putrefy. Anyway, this was a big exporting product for the Jews in Israel. We found them all over the Mediterranean in sunken ships that had amphora that were still sealed under the water, that contained not just fish from Lake Galilee, Sea of Galilee, but a stamp on the amphora saying, this is from Galilee. And there was a terrible tasting sauce that garum, I think it was dead fishes, just awful stuff, that they would ferment. Some of that was also part of the Jewish fishery trade. Okay. So we know that there's a allowed population of Jews there by 250 BC. We know that that population gets much larger. There is a section of Rome from ancient times until today known as the Ghetto of Rome. And ghetto is not a pejorative word in Italian or in Latin. It was the zone of the city where Jews lived. Now, it would later become pejorative if you don't like Jews and you don't like their quarter of the city. But the word ghetto was used without negative kind of overtones. It's just the area of the city. That's quite ancient. If you ever go to Rome today and you visit the Ghetto, which is right on the edge of the Ghetto, is the huge, very beautiful synagogue of Rome, you realize you're going down steps and downhill about 8 to 10 feet below the current level of the city. And in Rome, the lower you are, the more ancient the land you're standing on. So 8 feet below the street level is probably about 800, 900 years older than the street level. And all of the Ghetto is lower than the regular street level of most modern city. The Jews were prosperous. I should say some Jews were prosperous. And we know that around the turn of the millennium, around 0 and after into the time of Christ, there is a lot of interest in Romans about Judaism. There's a curiosity about it that for some might have been faddism, like Madonna embracing the Cabal, medieval Judaism. Right, like she's really serious about obeying the Torah. She might be, I just kind of doubt it. There might have been some of that kind of faddism about it. But we know that there are also cases, and we see this also in Israel, where Romans betrayed, not just that they're interested, but they have been studying, probably with a Pharisaic scholar, they've been studying Judaism. So we have the case in the New Testament of the Roman who builds the synagogue in Capernaum, which is still there. You can still see the foundation of that, and then on top of that old foundation is a later synagogue. That was done by a Roman official. And we know that in Rome, in the city itself, that there were many people who were Gentiles but were interested. But this is a problem for some Jews. The question in Judaism was, and in some cases in modern Israel is the same, who is a Jew? Now we tend to think that anyone who is born of a Jewish mother is somehow ethnically Jewish, but that wasn't always the case. There are cases in the ancient world when it's only through the father's line that you are Jewish, not the mother's line. There are definitions, how far back. Ironically, the modern definition of a Jew in modern Israel, believe it or not, comes from the Nazi laws of 1935. The definition the Nazis used is the definition the state of Israel pretty much adopts as the definition of who. And it's an issue legally because if you're a Jew, you can claim Israeli citizenship without any questions asked. But you have to prove it goes back to your grandparents, and I don't know how all that works. But it's a problem. So if you're a full-grown pagan adult and you want to convert to Judaism, there are some Jews who will say, you can't. You have to be born a Jew in some way or other, whether it's your father or your mother. Others will say, no, if he agrees to adopt and follow the dictates of Torah, then he can be a full Jew as long as he is circumcised. There are Jews who understand we're living in the year 35 AD and there's no antiseptic and there's no anesthesia, and that a grown man does not want her to go through that surgical procedure. And Jews will accommodate that. Oh, of course not. Yes, but you're still a Jew. And other Jews will say, absolutely cannot happen. You cannot be a Jew without circumcision. This is an issue. But we do know from both Jewish writers and Christian writers that there were lots of wealthy, intelligent, educated Romans who felt very fondly towards Judaism. Had they not had encountered this business about what really makes you a Jew, would have probably been completely willing to become Jewish entirely. So those people are called by different names, and you'll run into in the New Testament. Proselytes, sometimes as Jews. The more common term is God-fearers, or they'll say the Greek-speaking Jews. Generic, anyone who's a Gentile speaks Greek, whether they actually speak Greek or not, even if they're speaking Latin. Jews refer to them all as Greek speakers. So there's all these different terms for Gentiles that are as close to becoming Jews as is possible. Why am I yammering about this? This is that crowd that is in between. They're not fully Jews, and therefore evangelizable in a particular way. They're not fully Gentiles who would be evangelizable in their particular way. This group is a mixture. We think they also were a bit of a padding between two otherwise perhaps hostile groups. If Mr. Macaronius becomes a Jew, Jews don't look so weird to Gentiles. Well, I know Mr. Macaronius. I work with him on a couple of construction jobs. He seems so normal. Oh, then maybe Jews are normal. So there's this crowd we also think was a target for the initial evangelizers. It kind of goes in a gradation. First, Jewish followers of Jesus go to Jews. They go to the synagogues, they evangelize from Jews to Jews. But then we think, Paul will tell us this, that his experience has been, I've done that. And the Jews will not accept Jesus. So I say, hell with the synagogue, I'm going to just directly talk to the Gentiles. This group in between might have been an easier target. If they did their demographic studies, their algorithms might have shown them, oh, we're going to have a better chance with this group than with the full Gentiles or the full Jews. We are pretty sure from the names we find in the letter to the Romans, which I'll talk about a little bit later, that the Christians to whom Paul is addressing his letter include God-fearers. Pagans who at one time wanted to become Jews are now interested in Christ and the gospel. We'll see he lists 26 names in the letter to the Romans that he greets in some way or other, either in the very beginning or at the end of the letter. And he'll say hi to Pat and Mike and Susie and Joey. And he has this very long list of names, which has intrigued scholars for a long time, and I'll talk about that. But those names reveal that some of them are Jewish names. Just it's important to know if that's a Jewish name or a Gentile name. So when Acts chapter 6 has the institution of deacons, the issue that sparks that problem, if you remember, I talked about this last week, our Greek-speaking widows and orphans are being cheated in the distribution of bread when we celebrate the Eucharist. And the apostles say, we don't have time to deal with this. Let us choose 6 good men to take care of the distribution of food to the Greek speakers, the Gentiles, Christians. All of those 6 names are Greek names. No, not one Jewish name in that list, which makes sense. The problem is not with the Jewish widows and orphans. The problem is that the Greek-speaking widows and orphans are feeling maligned in some way. And one of them, who is the first martyr for Christianity, what is it? Stephen. What does a martyr get? When we look at the pictures, ancient paintings, mosaics, and statues of martyrs, how do we identify them by their iconography today? Usually, you go to an old church, you see a picture of a long line of martyrs. How are they almost always dressed? What do you see?
There's always how they were killed.
Often that, the means of death, so they're holding a sword, or, that's true.
For St. Jude.
Pardon?
Or club for St. Jude.
Right, so the wheel for St. Barbara, all that, that gruesome stuff. That's true. But what color usually is the clothing that they're wearing?
Red.
We wear red to celebrate them, but there has been washed white, how? In the blood of the Lamb. Almost always wearing white. Almost always in their hand or next to them is a palm branch or a palm tree, which was the palm of victory. If you won the race, you got a palm branch, or you're the victor. And the third thing, they're either wearing or carrying a crown. The crown of martyrdom. And the Greek word for crown, Stephanos. I'm curious that the first martyr to the faith, his name is Crown. That's his name, Stephen. Anyway. So, the Romans have been in Rome, or the Jews have been in Rome for a long time. Politically, they are aligned with the Julius Caesar faction, so around 40, 45 BC, Julius Caesar, wait, let me go back a bit further. 63 BC, the great Roman general Pompey was sent by the Senate to Israel to squash a revolt of sorts that was going on there because of the Maccabees. The Maccabees was a Jewish family that 100 years earlier had resisted Antiochus Epiphanes, the persecution against the Jews. They resisted and they were victorious. So Roman Senate said, Maccabees, you seem to be stronger than the Seleucid monarchy. Seleucid king, you withdraw back to Antioch. Now the territory of Israel will be ruled by the Maccabean family. But after 100 years, they had such terrible infighting that they had such factions amongst the Jews that they start revolting among themselves. The one guy actually kills his cousin, murders his cousin, the high priest Onias III. So one of these stupid candidates for the high priesthood sends a message to the Senate, could you just send us a itty bitty teeny-weeny little Roman army just to help me, and then everything will be fine? Well, Rome sends the greatest military man of his day, Pompeius Mangus, with his army in 63 BC. He crushes the revolt powerfully and very brutally, brings back prisoners for the victory parade to Rome, installs a permanent standing army of Roman soldiers now permanently garrisoned in Israel, up in the north at Caesarea Maritima, and temporarily housed right next to the temple at the Fortress Antonia, named after Mark Antony. This sparks a lot of ill will amongst the Jews in the city of Rome. The shame of these prisoners being brought back to Rome, which is what they always did after military victory, showed off. This is the Soviets marching the thousands of German prisoners down Moscow, 70 years ago at the end of the war, same thing. So this starts some ill will in the city of Rome about Roman authorities and against Pompeius Manius and his buddies. Pompeius Manius' enemy will be, later, Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar is very popular amongst the Jews. He gives them lots of perks in his army and in his conquered territory. He is easy and good to the Jews in Israel. So most of the wealthy, educated Jews of Rome become pro-Julius Caesar. So they back Julius Caesar when he has his fight with Cato, with Pompey, and with Brutus. And Mark Antony will be his ally. So King Herod names a city Caesarea Maritima, Caesarea Philippi, the Fortress Antonia after Mark Antony. It's all pro-Julius Caesar, pro-Julius Caesar. There's this terrible civil wars. Eventually, Julius Caesar's great-nephew, Octavius, later called Augustus, will win. So there is an upheaval in the relationship of Jews with those in power in Rome from the year 60 till about the year 20 BC. There's an uneven relationship. When Caesar was in power, everything went well, but after Caesar, things deteriorated. We also have, around this a little later, two writers, Jewish writers, Flavius Josephus, a great historian of around the year 80-90 AD. He was an instigator, initially, of the war against the Romans that began in 66 AD in Galilee. He was a military leader of the Jews. The Roman response was swift and thorough and just terrifying. He quickly realized there's no way we're going to win this war, and he changes sides to the Romans and tries to get the Jews to give up and surrender. So he becomes a Quisling, traitor, turncoat, and is sped off to Rome, where the Flavian emperors, Trajan and Vespasian, they will adopt him and sponsor him to write at least three very large literary works. One of them is The War Against the Jews. Another one is The Antiquities of the Jews. And the third one is Against Apion, a smaller work. This is a multi-volume historical, two sets of multi-volume historical works. Against the War Against the Jews and The Antiquities of the Jews is about 30 volumes. They have survived antiquity. We have all of the volumes. So we have the voice of Flavius Josephus that is contemporary, just about contemporary with Paul. Paul dies in 66. Flavius Josephus' career really takes off around the year 80. But he's a contemporary of Paul's. He was alive during Paul's lifetime. We have his writings. There's a second writer, a little bit later, a very well-educated man in Alexandria, Egypt, called Philo of Alexandria. We have a lot of his writings that have survived antiquity. He's a philosopher type. They're important to us because the two of them both share one trait in their writings. They are apologists for Judaism. But it's a little heavier-handed than just an apologist. It's the old Soviet thing for those of us who remember the Cold War. No matter what we had that was good, the Soviets said they had the first baseball. We invented baseball. Lenin invented baseball. The Ford car. It was first called Ford car. We had this first. That kind of thinking, both Philo and Flavius Josephus have that in their works. Oh, you Romans think you have a good system of law? It's nothing compared to what we have in the Torah. You think you have bright philosophers? They're ignoramuses compared to our great religious thinkers. So there's a certain arrogance that now gets thrown into the intellectual mix of this part of the world, where Judaism is looked down upon And they respond in just the opposite. Not only are we as good, we are better than you people. And that stirs up antagonism between Jews and Romans. Christianity in Rome. We believe Christianity came to Rome shortly after, I mean very shortly after, the ascension of Jesus. I would put money on 37, 38 AD as already having established Christian communities. Why? There's a lot of commerce, a lot of travel all over the Mediterranean going through Rome. The chances of some of those travelers, perhaps even sailors in the Roman military, certainly tradesmen traveling from the birthplace of Christianity in Judea or in Israel, Galilee, the chances of some of them making their way to Rome is very likely. There was a lot of trade that went on, goods, services, and people moving through Rome. That just increases the chances. But I think more importantly, Paul's letter to this place, this famous city, he implies in the last chapter that there are lots of house churches. When I say house church, that was the first organizational schema of the church in the first 200 years. So this is pretty much what it sounds like. Someone who has a big house that is big enough to accommodate a meeting of Christians. And by meeting, I mean a dining room that can accommodate reclining on couches to eat the Eucharistic banquet. So while it's big, it's not a lot. Couches in a room, you can't have a lot of people on couches in a room unless the room is really big. And really big rooms were not the normal thing for even some wealthy Romans. It's been guessed that between 30 and 40 would be the limit of a house church probably in Rome in the first century. Whatever the limit or number was per house church, you need to think in terms of there being a lot of them amongst the Romans. It may have been a neighborhood thing. I should have done this last week. I thought about it and I thought I didn't and I should have. So put me on pause for a minute. New man. One of the things that is deeply characteristic of Roman and Greco-Roman society is the people join associations. It's just part of their culture. So you're a plumber. Your union is the local 101 of the bronze workers of Apollo, and you have 50 members. Everyone belongs to something. In addition to that, being a plumber, you also like the god Asclepius, and there are associations dedicated to the god Asclepius. So you also belong to the Asclepian Society of 3rd and Oak Street. And you may belong to a badminton society. These associations were marked by regular banqueting. And I mean once a month is kind of the least you had to do it.
Wow.
So as a bronze worker, you go to their monthly dining banquet for which you pay dues. But then you're also a badminton specialist. You belong to that group. You go to theirs, which is every 6 weeks. Oh, and you belong to, what was the other one I said? The Asclepius cult. You go to his temple where they have a banquet room that they lend and rent out. It is a society of associations, and the associations mark their membership by regular banquets, not just fast food from McDonald's. You have to rent a hall that has couches, and you can show off that you do it proper. I may be just a plumber, but man, we put on the best banquet, in the south side of the city of Rome. Ours is always the best. That's a big deal to them. It is a very important aspect. This is important for the history of Christianity because we believe the early Romans thought of Christians, what's their central cultic thing? A weekly meal. Romans would look at that and say, oh, they're another one of these associations. Just another association dedicated to some weird god. We have hundreds of those around our city. We don't care. My point is, Christians meeting for a weekly meal, it would not have been unusual in this culture, And the facilities to do that would have been readily available either from a wealthy Christian or rentable. Synagogues often rented banquet rooms. Temples rented banquet rooms. An individual could build one and rent it out for himself and his family and their to-dos. Thousands of plates of engravings have been discovered in Rome and all over the ancient Near East, where the rules of the Asclepian Association 101 are carved in either in bronze or in stone, and they were put on the side of the building. So everybody knows you have to pay this much wine per month. And they had rules. If you got drunk, then you'd be kicked out for the next 3 meals. You couldn't come back for 3 months. You'd have to pay 100 sesterces, whatever. All engraved these very fine, detailed rules about banqueting. Christians banquet. Their cult is a weekly meal. Why am I yammering about this? In Paul's letter to the 1 Corinthians, he writes to them, which we're going to talk about next Wednesday. He writes to them and uses 2 forms of very important Greek words. He says, so the Corinthians are having a problem with their Sunday Eucharistic meals. The wealthy who don't have to work, they come early, they eat the best food, they're drinking too much. By the time the poor come, the rich are drunk and abusive to the poor, and I know you're just a lousy plumber. Hey, plumber, go fetch me another bucket. I'm not your slave, That there are these kinds of fights going on amongst the Christians in Corinth, which is why Paul writes his letter. And he says, how can you misbehave during this event? Don't you remember that and then he says, paradidomi, I handed down to you. That verb handed down means something old, like your grandmother's Waterford crystal or your grandpa's old Ford Model T car that you've kept in the family for ages. And it's something old and precious. He says, I handed down to you that which was handed down to me. And what is that which was handed down to him? And he says, that. My phone was ringing, and I had that on the night before he died, Jesus took bread in his holy hands, blessed it, broke it, and gave his disciples and said, take this, all of you, and eat of it. This is my body. And then he took the chalice filled with wine, said the blessing, and said to his disciples, take this, and what we call the institution narrative, what we do every time we have Mass. Paul writes this to the Corinthians as though he knows they know this. Of course they know it. They've been doing it. The assumption is they've been doing it for years. I'm reminding you of what you do every Sunday. And in other letters, he will include hymns. Hymns that we, I think, rightly imagine were hymns that were sung during their Eucharistic banquets, because the associations always would sing hymns to their patron, to the god or to the emperor or whoever was their reason for getting together. They'd sing songs to him. Paul will quote these hymns in his letters. Now wait a minute. How? So I'm in Antioch, and you're in, God out in the bushes of Corinth or somewhere. 1,500 miles away, write to you, expecting you to know. I assume you know the ritual. Even hymns that we sing in Alexandria, Egypt, or hymns that we sing at Mass in Corinth, or hymns that we sing at Mass in Antioch, or in Ephesus, or in Damascus, that you'll know them in Rome. Otherwise, why would he quote you those hymns? Any of you who are old might remember, all glory, laud, and honor to thee, Redeemer King, to whom the lips of children make loud hosannas ring, hosanna to the... And when do we sing that? If you're really old, you remember. Palm Sunday. It was the normal Catholic hymn on Palm Sunday. If I were to write a letter to the cathedral parish and say, well, we did our all glory, lauds, and honors last week, and you would assume, he's talking about their Palm Sunday last week. You would know that. That's what's going on in this dynamic of Paul quoting hymns to letters all over the Mediterranean. He writes Corinthians in 50. How long does it take for cultic behavior to become institutionalized and spread, where I can talk to a group in Egypt or in Syria or in Rome or in Greece and expecting what we do, you do. And furthermore, I know that what we do, you do. How long does it take for such institutionalization of cult to happen? not mentioning spread geographically the way it did. If Paul says what he gives and gave to the Corinthians, and he writes his letter in 50 or so, I handed on this old thing to you, how old was it? How long have the Corinthians and have Christians been celebrating the Eucharist? If when Paul writes in 50, that this is something that's already old. 15 years, is that old? What would that mean? It's not an unreasonable arithmetic. My point is the notion that there are Christian communities old enough to have their cult standardized and somewhat universalized is the way we ought to be thinking of the Christian house churches of Rome. They are probably not only well established, they are old well established. They have been there almost since the resurrection and ascension of Jesus Christ. At least they had their origins back then. Do you see why I think this is important? That we understand when Paul writes to these people, he has a warranted assumption that they are celebrating the Eucharist just like every other church place, Christian house church around the Mediterranean is doing. From Alexandria, Egypt, to Rome, to Athens, to the Black Sea and Bithynia, where there are many, many Christians we know by the year 100. How long does it take for them to get all the way up there? It's Black Sea area. Yeah, this is spread far and wide, and it has spread deeply, very, very quickly. Okay, anybody want to fight with me about that? I know there's a lot of ifs. I'm piling up ifs. But I think the ifs I've piled up are reasonably up-piled.
So I'll fight with you just for again that I had last week. Why is this so easy? I mean, why do these people? You know, I wrote you that email. I mean, they're tough people. I mean,
what made it attractive? Why would they? Yeah. There have been many theories about this. Some have said, in reviewing the writings of especially Greek and Roman philosophers near the year 0, so from 100 BC, the Hellenistic period, to 200 AD, they find a certain ennui in their writing. The old religion isn't doing it for anybody anymore. It just isn't working. And people are beginning to realize and accept the fact that, why are we killing a goat for Apollo? I mean, what's that about? That questions are being asked for the first time during this period that have never been asked. But a second, I think, more cogent explanation is, and we know this from the time after the death of Alexander the Great in 300 AD, or 300 BC, that what most historians call mystery cults are becoming extremely popular amongst the formerly Greco-Roman types. So it's one thing in Syria to have a mystery cult, a weird religion about your big god whose name is Baal. It's weird, it's kinky, you hop on one foot 3 times when there's a full moon, or you do these weird things. The exotic stuff starts to become very attractive to the otherwise more sober Greco-Roman types. So Suetonius will talk of Christianity as one of these mystery religions, and he will say, like every other weirdity across the empire, it finds its sinking place in the capital. So he's saying, like Rome is San Francisco in the 1960s. You know, the Haight-Ashbury, all the hippies were pulled to the West Coast. Suetonius says all the weird stuff winds up in Rome, and this religion of the Christians is just another example of one of these weird religions. I think that is probably more of the reason. People began to see that there are other ways of accessing that which they hoped the religion would access for them. They're doing it in ways that now mean something to them. So these mystery religions were highlighted by the fact that there is a secret that only the initiates can be told. That's the mystery. So you want to become a big one. A big competitor of Christianity was the cult of Mithras. This is a Persian cult of a bull god, a bull who has to be slain. You want to become a Mithrite. they have a Mithraeum still intact, believe it or not, under the Irish Dominican Church in Rome. Still, it's funny. It's weird. The Mithraeum is built. Then there's a 4th century Christian church. Then there's like medieval 11th century church. And then there's the church that's there today. And you can just go downstairs and mark the history. You go down about 50 feet, and there is intact a room about half this size, the Mithraeum. It's a weird religion. I don't know why you want to be one, but okay. So you go into this room, and you sit on a bench against the wall, and over your head, the floor above you has slots in the floor. While you're sitting there, we bring in a bull to the room up above. We slash its jugular veins, and then push all the blood down on top of you. That's how, yeah, it was fun. That's how you become an advocate of Mithras. That's the initiation rite. You were forbidden to tell anyone what happened to you, and no one could tell you before you did it what was going to happen to you. It was the secret initiation rites that no one can know. It's the secret handshake of the Knights of Columbus and the, what's the other one, the
Knights of Malta.
No, yeah, probably the Knights of Malta, but no, the Eastern Star, what's that called?
The
Masons. The Masons.
Yeah.
It's that kind of secrecy that people were enticed by that. It's just me and the God. It's just me and the goddess. And it's just us. We all know it, and they don't. That seemed to have had a great appeal. But it had an appeal because something was lost in the value of the previous practices that no longer satisfied them, that this weird stuff did. Yes?
I don't want to steer us too far off, but is that then a milieu that allows Gnosticism to really kind of take hold?
Exactly.
That is what Gnosticism is.
Yes.
Secret knowledge.
Secret knowledge. The gnosis, the Gnosis, the gnosis is the secret knowledge. Christianity also had this rule. You could not inform a non-Christian of your initiation rite of baptism. It was forbidden. It was called the mystagogy, the mystery that you couldn't tell non-Christians. Now, we dropped that, I think, by the 2nd century. But that was a very important element of baptism, that you, after you got baptized, you couldn't tell anybody what they did to you that midnight in the back of that church. You were forbidden to tell anyone. And you would have to do public penance if they found out you had broken the secret. Yeah, I mean, I could see some good reason for it, but it's pointless now. Yes.
If Christianity was being seen and known by 35 AD, is there any record? I mean, that's right up to just a couple of years after the Great Commission. Is there any records of particular apostles heading in that direction, or?
We certainly know we have 2 different sources. Very strong archaeological source that supports Peter having been there because he dies there. Literary support for Paul because we have his letter to the Romans telling us he's going there. Now, what we don't have is records or any archaeological support for Paul's tomb. We have archaeological support for the tomb under St. Peter's belonging to Peter.
But aren't you saying that Paul, by the time Paul was writing to them, that this was a religion that was already present?
Yes.
So we don't know
How it got there?
Yeah, and how do I say this? The way that it's being presented here is that it's just another religion that's competing with the other ones, right?
No, I'm saying that outsiders perceived it that way. Christians very clearly knew we are not them. We are not like the Dionysius. We are not like Mithraeum. They were very, very certain about that. We are not that. Outsiders weren't so sure. What did they see? In fact, the governor of Bithynia writes a letter to the emperor, I forget which emperor it is, who has told him, you have to arrest Christians. It's around 100 AD. And it's Pliny the Younger. Pliny writes back, he's the governor of this province of Bithynia up on the Black Sea, and he says, well, this is what I see they do. They meet regularly for a meal. They sing hymns to a man called Christus as though he is a god. They keep their oaths and promises. So they're known for not breaking their word, whether it's legal or financial. And he and someone else later says, and they're odd because they take care of sick people to whom they are not related. And he says, so with some sympathy to the emperor, so what are they doing wrong? Why should I arrest them? And the emperor writes back and says, well, leave them alone as much as you can. If someone forces you to do it because they make a big public stink about it, you're going to have to do it. But if you can overlook it, please just leave them alone. But so what he describes is they meet regularly for a banquet, like an association. They sing hymns at that banquet, like the association. To outsiders, Romans, they looked like another one of these clubs. And the clubs were not good or bad. They had clubs of thieves, known gangs. So the gangs of Oak and 4th Street had an association that met once a month, dedicated to a god or a goddess, who they often would put, and it was often by neighborhood. So at 4th and Oak Street, they would put on the wall of the building at that corner a statue of a goddess as their patrons of their thieving and murdering and raping and pillaging. It was just ubiquitous. Everybody belonged to some kind of a, what's Fred Flintstones, the Poobahs, or the lodges. It's that kind of thing. Outsiders viewed Christians as one of those. They also connected it to the East, which made it intriguing for some outsiders because it's Eastern. Egyptian was the best, but Syria was good. God, we get to Persia, that's really good. So the Mithraic cult is very popular because it's all the way from Persia, and they're really weird. This mystery stuff that hangs on them because they're from the East was a big part of the appeal, we think, from the outside looking in. Paul knows of the mystery cults, and he knows, he's a very well-educated Hellenistic man. He knows Hellenistic philosophy, he knows Hellenistic rhetoric very well, and uses rhetorical devices in all of his letters, but he also knows the competition. He knows that the old religion, the civic religion, is weakening, and that these weird religions are finding an appeal. He wants to make sure that they know we're not that, and that his own members know we're not that. Yes?
When Paul says, I am handing on to you what was handed on to me, so how was it handed on to him? He wasn't with the other apostles.
Oh gosh, you sound like one of those nasty Judaizers. He was an apostle. He was an apostle. No, but he will say of his own experience that after the mystical encounter with Christ on the road to Damascus, he was with the Christians in Damascus and then for 14 years went to Arabia. We don't know where he means by that. It's not present-day Arabia, we know that. The suggestion is he's with a Christian community learning about Christianity. And he will say, to your point, well, I'm not an apostle the way they are apostles, but I am an apostle, one born out of the normal course. I just had to preach on this a couple of days ago. And the word he uses there is also the medical term that Greek physicians use for miscarriage. I was miscarried as an apostle. They were born normally. I was miscarried as an apostle. Because why? Because I did see the Lord, but it was in a different way. I saw him in the mystical encounter on the road to Damascus. They saw him in the flesh in Israel while he was alive. So he talks about that specifically. The assumption is he learned this while he was gone for those over 14 years from his conversion. He's just off the radar. We have he doesn't tell us. He just says that he was gone for 14 years to Arabia. We don't know what he was doing, but he's probably learning this old tradition. He certainly knew about baptizing, because his letters he talks about those he did and didn't baptize. I don't like baptizing people because it makes factions out of you Christians. You're going to say, oh, I was baptized by Paul. Oh, I was baptized by James. I was baptized by Father Bill. I was baptized. He doesn't want that. But he knows about it, obviously, because he has a great theology worked out about baptism. So there's a ritual that he has thought about deeply and pretty much defines for the modern church what is the theology of baptism. So he knew about that from the very beginning. He had to be baptized. And that would have been that weird to him as a Pharisee. They're dunking in mikvahs all the time. Head has to go under the water for ritual purification. That would have been somewhat similar to him and to other Jews. So. Okay. Yes?
I'm a little confused about, or maybe you didn't explain it. The house church celebrated the Eucharist, but not as a don't know how to put it, write or codified
Well,
or,
we know
yeah.
from Paul, because Paul is the oldest witness we have to the Eucharist. That text in 1 Corinthians is older than the gospel descriptions. Remember, Paul is dead before the gospels are written. So
Right.
that description in 1 Corinthians is the oldest we have. And they call it the love feast or the agape, or the Lord's Supper. What we think it was is that people brought food to the hall themselves. A covered dish. Think of Lutherans and Lake Wobegon.
Yeah.
The covered dish dinner. Why? Because Acts and Paul both say it's a time for giving food to the poor. As well as our sharing the meal, it's the time when the poor among us who don't have food can come and get food. And then it's done on Sunday. It's on the first day of the week. That's already established by the time Paul writes his letters. So what it looks like is, Hellenistic banquet had a very strict regimen of how it was to be done. Every Hellenistic banquet follows a two-part schedule. Part one is called the deipnos, the dinner. Greco-Roman people did not drink wine with their meal. You ate food without drinking. That's the deipnos, that's the dinner. And they're very clear about this. After the meal is over, everything to do with the meal, the plates and the food is cleared off of the tables. And remember, you're reclining on couches. Little tables are put in front of you. The waiters clear all of that out. And then there's, with some show, they bring in a big container of wine. They will, with a ceremony, mix some water with the wine, say a prayer. If you're a pagan, you say a prayer to Dionysus. If you're in the eastern part of the empire, the Greek god of wine. If you're in the west, it's Bacchus. And you pour some on the floor to the god. Here's to you, Bacchus, and this wonderful Pinot Noir of year 3. You pour some out for him. And then everyone in the room reclines on couches and drinks wine. And that's called the symposium. First part is the deipnos, the supper. The second part is the symposium. The host has to provide the wine and entertainment for the symposium. Note, there's a Latin phrase, nota bene, note well. Note well our Eucharistic prayers at our Mass that capture a little bit of this in that one little phrase that endures in almost all of our Eucharistic prayers. Then, after the meal, Jesus took the chalice filled with wine, meaning he was celebrating a meal as a typical Hellenistic person. You eat first, clear off the food, and then you have the wine brought in, and you share the wine with the diners. The Greek word for a dinner guest is the reclining one. That's how intimately tied this culture of dining is in this age and in these people.
But did it have a Christian overtone?
Absolutely. So that, because Paul says, then he repeats the whole institution narrative. And we remember that Jesus took the bread, blessed it, broke it, gave his disciples.
Did they do that?
Yes, that's what Paul is quoting in the First Corinthians.
Okay.
When did they do that in this meal? We don't know.
Okay, but they did do
The suspicion is the meal part started with Jesus took bread and broke it, because that's how, in this age, Jewish meals always begin. How do you mark the beginning of a Jewish meal? The head of the family takes a piece of bread and tears it or breaks it.
Right.
That marks the beginning of the dinner part. Then, taking the cup marks the beginning of the symposium part. And by the way, the symposium entertainment was often someone reciting the great deeds of the heroes of the past. Aeneid, Ajax, the Homeric heroes, from Virgil's Aeneid or from the Odyssey and the what's the one? Iliad and the Odyssey. And so who would the Christians be talking about? Jesus. The hymns they're singing go on then. Paul's letters were probably read as the, quote, entertainment of the Christian weekly meal. Hey, we got a letter from Paul. We'll save it till Sunday when everybody's here. Which is probably one of the ways they got spread. Make a copy and send it over to the house church down the street. They haven't gotten a copy yet. That's probably how they got so widespread so quickly. I'm glad you asked that, because it is confusing. Mm-hmm. So we have the barest token left of a meal in our ritual.
Yeah.
which makes it sometimes difficult to understand how this came about, that what we have now is the Mass, how did it get that way? Understanding its origins makes it a little bit easier, but yeah. So, okay. Wait, I didn't even say anything about this. One of these apologists for Judaism, Philo, even more so than Flavius Josephus, bragging about the Jewish law. It frees Gentiles from their desires and allows the person to master their passions. It's kind of a Buddhistic approach to the Torah. If you follow the Torah, your passions will calm, you'll want for nothing, you'll always be content and satisfied. The law thinks that all those who adhere to sacred institutions established by Moses ought to be free from the unreasonable passions and from all wickedness. So the apology of Judaism to Greco-Romans is the law of Moses is actually a better law than the laws that you have, and it's better than the philosophies you have because it helps a human being to control passions, which is a big deal for Greco-Romans. Marcus Aurelius, all the stuff he writes is about controlling passions and keeping everything calm and not being riled by the vagaries of life that can happen. So here's a quote also promoting the Jewish Torah observance as superior to philosophies of the Greco-Romans. Reason, I suggest, is the mind making a deliberate choice of the life of wisdom. Wisdom is knowledge of things divine and human and their causes. And this wisdom, I assume, is the culture we acquire from the Torah, through which we learn the things that God reverently, and the things of men to our worldly advantage. The forms of wisdom consist of prudence, justice, courage, and temperance. Of all these, prudence is the most authoritative, for it is through it that reason controls the passions. This is written about 160, 150 BC by Greco-Roman Jews, Hellenistic Jews, who wrote the books of Maccabees. So we see at this time, Judaism is trying to explain itself better and compare itself to the Greco-Romans. Nowhere was this done more than in Athens and in Rome, the two places in the world that thought of themselves as the center of the high points of Greek and Roman culture. So the letter itself, we think, is written somewhere around 56 or 60 AD. There is some reason to believe that it was written probably from Corinth, that Paul is in the city of Corinth, hears something or decides this is the time he wants to write this long letter to the Romans. Why that is, I'll explain in a minute. There's a text in chapter 15 that suggests. So, Paul writes, "At present, however, I am making my way to Jerusalem to bring aid to God's dedicated people there." This is that money collection. This will come up a couple of times in this letter. "For Macedonia and Achaia kindly decided to make some contribution for the poor among these people in Jerusalem." Those are Jewish Christians, for whom he's collecting money from Gentile Christians. Probably the Christians that those Jewish Christians in Jerusalem don't like. Probably. But he says, look at the Christians in Macedonia and Achaia, who were making a big contribution for the poor in Jerusalem. They kindly decided to do so, and indeed they are indebted to them. For if Gentiles have come to share in the spiritual blessings of Jerusalem Christians, they ought to be of service to them in material things. So when I have completed this task, the collection of the money, which he's been doing for years apparently, when I have completed this task and have delivered the contribution to Jerusalem in person under my own seal, then I will set out for Spain, and on my way west I will stop in Rome. This is a long text in the letter to the Romans where he's explaining to them, I've wanted to come to you guys for a long time. I haven't. I've been waiting on this collection. The last minute, it sounds like we got a big contribution from Macedonia and from Achaia, so I had to collect that, but I'm getting there. Once I do this, then I will come back. So remember, Jerusalem was off to the east in Israel. He's going to come across the Mediterranean and get to Rome, and from there he will push on to Spain. So the object of his trip is Spain, not Rome. Rome is a stop on the way. And he will say in this letter, while I'm with you, I would like you to support me financially and with people in a new mission to Spain. No one has ever evangelized in the Iberian Peninsula yet, which is why it appeals to Paul. He's not going to run into any Judaizers there. He will have no one to contradict his gospel if he goes to Spain, because there are no Christians there yet. So he's very anxious that the Roman churches will support him in this missionary push to the farthest western edge of the Mediterranean and the Roman world of the Mediterranean. I don't know why he doesn't go to Africa. It's very Roman. It would have been very familiar, maybe the same problem. But why doesn't he go to Carthage or to Cyrene or where Augustine is at Hippo? I mean, would be later in Hippo. I don't know. It's certainly a lot closer. But, he wants to get as far away from the Judaizers, I think, as he can possibly get. And that's the edge of the world. Yes.
Well, Spain is modern day Spain.
Yes. And they refer to it as Spain, but they mean Portugal. What they mean is the Iberian Peninsula, which had recent, maybe, I think by 120, 140 BC, that's pretty well conquered by the Romans. Spain is and has been a Roman colony for some time, because I know it is, because when Julius Caesar is still in the military, he can't conquer anything there in France, northern France, but he can't get anything in Spain because it's already conquered, which is why he goes north to northern France and to Germany, and then later they'll go all the way up to the edge to the British Isles. Well, not to Ireland. They never get to Ireland, but they got to England. So Hadrian builds his wall up there. So that's the furthest extent of the empire at the time of Paul is Spain, the Iberian Peninsula. He mentions a woman, Phoebe, and he's in this letter to the Romans. This is somewhat geographically, I think, helpful. So he says that Phoebe is from a town called Cenchreae. Cenchreae, we know exactly where this town was. It is the port of the city of Corinth. The port of Rome is Ostia. The port of Corinth is this town called Cenchreae. So it's very near Corinth, which is why many scholars believe his mention of Phoebe from Cenchreae suggests that Paul is in Corinth with some of these people while he's writing this letter to the Romans, which is why I put this in there. Seems to imply that she will be his mailman for the letter, not for the collection, but for the letter going to Rome, because he will say, I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a minister of the church of Cenchreae. Well, what does that mean, minister? Was she an ordained minister? We're not going to talk about that. A minister of the church of Cenchreae, please receive her. So he's telling the Romans, she's coming to you, and when she gets there, be nice to her. Receive her in the Lord in a manner worthy of God's dedicated people, and help her in whatever way she may require of you. She has been a patroness, and she's probably a wealthy Roman woman, patroness of many here, and of myself too. So here is Corinth. I couldn't find what Cenchreae mentioned, but it is right on the isthmus. So this isthmus, that little bit of land where that blue arrow is, that was a terrible problem for the ancient world. Nero tried to cut a canal through it himself, but he never finished it. He abandoned the job. Because imagine what time you can save if you can sail through there and not have to go either all the way around, or what they actually started doing, which is almost as weird, they would empty the boat, take the mast off of it, and put the boat like on rails, and have teams of oxen pull the empty boat across the isthmus and put it back together on the other side and then reload it. You can imagine the time and the money that cost. But Cenchreae is the port at that isthmus. So it is a big and prominent town, but it is very near, literally walking distance of Corinth. So the fact that Paul mentions this woman from Cenchreae, who is with him now, and to whom he will consign the letter, suggests he probably is writing this letter from Corinth. And Corinth is a prominent Pauline church. He writes them 3 letters. We know. We only have 2 that have survived. But he says in the first letter, in my previous letter, so we know he wrote a letter before he wrote 1 Corinthians. It's an old church that he established and where he has deep ties. So it would not be unusual for him to spend time there on his way to Jerusalem. We believe he's saying what he says in the letter is actually what happened, that he will, as soon as he finishes the letter, he's making his way to Rome, or to Jerusalem, to get rid of the money, and then he's going to head out to Rome. This is after he'd gotten money from the Macedonians and from Achaia. This is talked about both in Romans and in 1 Corinthians and also in Acts of the Apostles. In Romans 15:26, for Macedonia and Achaia kindly decided to make some contribution for the poor among these people in Jerusalem. In Corinthians, he says, I will come to you after I pass through Macedonia, for I'm going to pass through Macedonia, and perhaps I shall stay or even spend the winter with you, so that you may send me on my way wherever I go. For I do not wish to see you now just in passing, but I will spend some time with you if the Lord permits. So, in the Corinthians, he's in the midst of this trip to Macedonia where he gets the money. By the time he writes to Romans, it's already been done. He's been there and collected the money from them. And then he will say, it says in Acts, that while he was, a plot was made against him by the Jews as he was about to sail for Syria, and he decided to return by way of Macedonia. This may be how he got to Macedonia to get the collection. So Acts seems to somewhat support. This letter is written from Corinth after he had collected money in Achaia and Macedonia, which he refers to in these other letters. He also talks about a man named Gaius of Corinth. The secretary says, Tertius, the writer of this letter, greets you in the Lord. Gaius, who is host to me and to the whole church, greets you. Sounds like Gaius is the head of a house church in Corinth. So we have a well-established, probably network of Christian house churches in the city of Corinth. If that's true, there are bigger ones and more of them in Rome. Remember, Rome is, at this time, has an excess of 1 million people. It is the largest city of the ancient world and would remain the record until 18th century London. No city in Europe will be as big as ancient Rome was until the late 1700s, when London will overtake over 1 million. Wow. Imagine. So, I talk about this in my classes a lot. If you're a farm boy from, nowhere Macedonia, and you come to Rome, can you imagine the impact? It would be almost like getting off on a foreign planet. A city that has running water, that has fountains, houses that have running water in them, houses that have indoor toilets, sanitation that keeps the streets clean all the time. They're paved in stone. Even the horse poop is cleared off immediately. I mean, it would have been like Disneyland to them. Really, the book of Revelation makes a big deal about the city of Rome because it had to have been a huge deal, a real center, a hub of the ancient world. To go to Rome must have been like going to Mars, I think. Especially if you're wealthy, of course. So he's preparing to head west to preach Christ. We're known as preach Christ. And he says that I have evangelized people from Jerusalem to Illyricum. Illyricum is Croatia, also called Dalmatia. The Dalmatian dog is from there. St. Jerome is a Croatian. He's from Dalmatia. So I don't have a map here. So here's the boot of Italy. Right over here is the coast of Illyricum. He says, I evangelized all the way from the farthest eastern part of the Mediterranean, Judea, Jerusalem, all the way to the boot of Italy, to Illyricum in Croatia. We don't know where he was in Croatia. I mean, there would have been 100 churches in Croatia to mark the spot, I'm sure, and I've never seen one. But he says he was there. Malta has a place where he says he was shipwrecked in Malta. There's a big basilica there. So before going to Rome, he has this visit over and over about this collection. I want you to remember this collection he's obsessed with this, not because of the money, although I'm sure that's a big part of it. He has theologized this. This is a way of fulfilling prophecies that all the world will stream towards Jerusalem. That stream in the prophetic books of ancient Judaism that talk about the universal nature of Judaism. My house shall be a house of prayer for all the nations. That means all the Gentiles. The word nations means Gentiles. The Psalm text that says everyone in the world will mark Jerusalem as their birthplace. and want to be known as having been born there. All the Gentiles will stream towards her. The canticle of Simeon in Luke's gospel. Now, Lord, you made this minister servant in peace, for my eyes have seen your salvation, which set before all the world as a light of revelation to the Gentiles and the glory of your people Israel. This is a big part of Paul trying to make this happen. The nations are streaming money and gold to Jerusalem, and they're all pagans. And as I said last week, I think it's also because it's hard to hate people that are keeping you from starving. And we think it was a famine that was the problem in Jerusalem that they're suffering from. And this is why Paul keeps pushing the collection of the money. So he will say then, in his letter to the Corinthians, now in regard to the collection of the holy ones, you also should do as I order the churches of Galatia. On the first day of the week, each of you should set aside, notice first day of the week, Father of church, set aside and save whatever he can afford, so that collections will not be going on when I come. And when I arrive, I shall send those whom you have approved with letters of recommendation to take your gracious gift to Jerusalem. If it seems fitting that I should go also, they will go with me. And after he wrote this, he decided that he would go. He would be the one to take it. He's the point man. He's the target for the anti-Gentile, forces of the early church. Him taking it is especially important, I think. And he will say also in 2 Corinthians similar things. I'm overkilling this, you get the point. We know that we're almost certain he writes the letter in Corinth. We're almost certain of a certain time frame when he wrote it. It's after he'd been to Macedonia, after he'd been to Achaia, and has a lot of money, and he's resting in Corinth, looking for someone to help him get this money to Jerusalem. Oh, and before I go, let me write a letter to the Romans, because after I finish this delivery of the cash, I'm going to head back west to Rome. Oh, and Phoebe, you're here, great. Do you take this letter with you when you go? So this is just laying out the kind of the context and the time frame for how this letter will begin, how it starts. It starts while he's in Corinth, and he has this collection on his mind. I'm not going to go over that. So, we learned last week, James and Cephas and John, who were reputed to be pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hands in partnership that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. Only we were mindful of the poor, the collection, which was the very thing I was eager to do. If you take courses on Paul or read books on Paul, I've never found one that I thought does justice to the significance that Paul has invested in this collection. It's talked about a lot in his letters, and there's a lot going on there that I think we should pay more attention to. But not this much attention to. So, just know that at the end of the letter to the Romans, Paul refers to this again, about him going to help the poor. About their helping the poor. That the pagans are helping the poor. So this is another witness. So we always consider Paul, our sources for Paul are his own letters, the best source, but also Acts of the Apostles. And in Acts chapter 11, it says this. At that time, prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch, and one of them, named Agabus, stood up and predicted by the Spirit that there would be a severe famine all over the world. And it happened under Claudius, which dates it around the late 40s, 49, 50, because he dies in 54. So the disciples determined that according to ability, each should send relief to the brothers who lived in Judea. This they did, sending it to the presbyters in care of Barnabas and Saul. Now, this is a post facto. This is written somewhere in the year 90, long after this has happened. Paul does this in the 50s, so it's 40 years old by the time this gets written. But it was remembered. So it's a big deal. Okay. I don't know. I've got more slides here. I've got probably another 20 slides on Romans. I think what I might do is try and get them to you on a flash drive. Mm-hmm. One of the things I got obsessed with, which I can do, as I was getting this stuff ready, it's stuff that I'm very familiar with. And I thought, well, someone's going to sit there and say, well, how can you say that? I mean, prove it. So I got hooked on including all the biblical citations to support what I was going to say. Next thing you know, I'm doing full pages of just verses out of the Bible. which I think is important. I want you to know that I'm not making it up, but also for your own review that you can say, well, wait a minute, where did this come from? Oh, it says Romans 15, verse 2. Look it up yourself and see how your translation words it. So while I did spend too much time on it, I hope it will serve you later. If you want to get a copy, I'll put it on a thumb drive, so you'll have access to them and know that I didn't make it up. The other thing that's important, I think, and I want to remember this whenever I do Bible studies, if you're pushed to do some research on your own, I want you to know some of what's out there in the scholarship that you're going to run into. So that when you look on your own to say something about the letter to the Romans, you'll find a reference to the collection, you'll know what they're talking about. Or a reference to the time frame, you will have already been familiar with some of that from going over it here. Because Paul is difficult. Even it says in the letter of Peter, who is 50 years after Paul, he says in his letter, Paul is difficult, and he's being misunderstood all over the world. I mean, yeah, in my classroom all the time, and in my own head. Paul is difficult. It is difficult. So I hope that, if nothing else, this can inspire you to do some of your own research, and I'll make these slides available to you that I think and I hope will help you to do that. That's my desire. Yes, ma'am.
This is kind of outside of the topic. Is there anything written about Paul in Ephesus with Luke, St. Luke, and our Blessed Mother?
Have you been to Ephesus? Is that why you asked this?
No, I've heard it, but I don't know anything to put my finger
Right. This comes up because there is a building in Ephesus revered by the Muslims as the home of Mary. And it's a very popular pilgrimage site for Muslims who have a great reverence for Jesus' mother. And her house, for the Muslims, her house is in Ephesus. So there is that. The origins of that are not scriptural. It's long after the New Testament had been finished that there begin to be traditions that connect Mary with Luke. Luke has been connected to Ephesus. If Luke was in Ephesus and he's connected to Jesus' mother, then she was there, and if she was there, she had to live somewhere, and oh, there's the house. So there's a tradition there, but it's not a biblical tradition, and certainly it's not an archaeological tradition. There is no historical basis for it, except that it has been there certainly since the Muslim domination of the area. It's very touching to see, especially pregnant Muslim women. They really have a great, they call her Miriam, but they have a great, great devotion. You see them by the hundreds going to that house in Ephesus. Yeah. There's all kinds of about Luke, that he was a physician, that he was a painter. There's a man named Luke who was a physician. Why he was a painter, I don't remember exactly why they thought he was a painter. But we don't know the name of the author of that gospel. The Gospel of Luke, Matthew, Mark, and John are all anonymous works for whom we don't have the name of the author. The author's name was added to manuscripts later. Now, without reason, perhaps, but there's no way Luke, contemporary of Paul, could possibly have written in the year 95, because Luke Acts is around 95. He would have been over 100 years old. John, the beloved disciple, that gospel was written around 105. Some date as late as 110. There's no way an eyewitness of Jesus would have been alive then. The traditions of that eyewitness are in there, but that eyewitness is not the author. And Luke's gospel says that. I collected the traditions from those who were eyewitnesses because I wasn't in the opening verses of Luke's gospel. Anyway. Okay? All right, well, thank you very much.